What's going on, everyone? It's Tay, aka Slay, and now for something completely different today. Yes, I'm talking about the limited docu-series Tiger King. I watched it twice. I watched it once all the way through, and then I watched it again after I decided to sit down and make content about it. So I gave this 2 days of my life. And I want to share my thoughts with you. So let's get right into it. The first episode is called Not Your Average Joe. This is basically where you're getting Joe's backstory, you're hearing his voice from inside the prison. So you already know how the series ends, you know that he ends up in jail. But that opening credit sequence where you're hearing all of these voices and you're hearing of the allegations and you're seeing Joe in his sequins shirts, and it's just like, you already know this is going to be a lot. And you hear Joe from the jail cell talking about dying doesn't scare me. I went into tiger cages every day prepared to die, so dying doesn't scare me. I won't say that gives you all you need to know about Joe, but it gives you a huge insight into his character. You're introduced to certain individuals like everybody else that owns this big cat. You're hearing certain stats and figures, and I'm just sitting back like, what is the fascination with owning a lion, with owning a tiger? Is it just because you know you're not supposed to own them that you're like, I need to have this? Or is it just, is it some sort of, I need to beat my chest and be like, I have domesticated this wild beast, so I am somebody? So Eric Good, he's a filmmaker. He's the person that put this series together and did a damn good job pitching this to Netflix, because let me tell you, I understand, well, after watching this twice, why Netflix picked this up, because it's fascinating and it will leave you bewildered at how all of these people in what seems like this tiny community of big cat owners want to rip out each other's throats. It's astounding. But he said the reason that he started diving into this community is because he had seen a snow leopard in the back of someone's van. And he was like, what is this snow leopard doing in the back of this guy's hot van in the United States? He meets with Joe and he starts talking to him, and Joe's very personable. The camera loves him. It's so obvious that he's loving doing these things. He says that he has 187 big cats in his zoo, and that he built his zoo over 16 years. And then we're introduced to, I think his name is Eric Cowie, very gruff looking man with blonde hair, blonde beard. He's sitting here hunched over, like every time the interviewer comes back to him, he's hunched over like this. And he said that he found the job on Craigslist. And this is a thought that I had going through all of it too, is none of these people have trained, like they may have trained in animal care, but I don't see any of them showing any kind of certification on where they learned how to care for these animals. Sitting here saying, I know how to care for them, I am taking care of them, though these animals aren't being abused, you would think that these people would have those types of certificates hanging up somewhere, because I see none of them in any of the houses, in any of the facilities, and it's just like, where is your training? I need to know where you learned how to care for lions, tigers, leopards, these little primates that you have all over your house. Like, how did you learn how to care for these animals? Please let me know. And then you meet John Ranke, the manager of the Greater Wynnewood Zoo, and this man has no legs. We found out what happened to his legs later, but let me say this while I'm thinking about it. The only people in this series that you really kind of root for are the people that work at Joe's Zoo. Everybody else is unsavory. Everyone else is out to get others and just out for their own gain. Everybody is selfish. Everybody's an egomaniac. So you don't root for anyone except the people that work at Joe's Zoo. And then you meet Healthy Safri, who's an animal keeper, and the first thing you notice, at least the first thing I noticed, is that she only has one arm. Why are there so many limbless people in this series? I want to know what happens. And that's one of the things that keeps you watching, because they don't give you all this information up front. They very cleverly sprinkle it out throughout the docuseries. And then all of a sudden you hear Joe singing and it's a music video. Are you a zookeeper or are you a country star? Like, pick one. Then you meet Joe's nemesis, Carole Baskin. I cannot wait till I get to her episode, because that is just chock full of it reads like an episode of Snapped. It really does. And you are introduced to her, and basically this persona that she puts on, where she's got like the flower hippie crown and an animal print shirt, very, very colorful. What's with the hippie flower crown? Are you trying to show that you're in tune with nature and you're one with these cats? It sounds phony. It sounds so phony. She says, I live, eat, and breathe ending the captivity of big cats. And yet you're keeping cats in captivity. Like, the hypocrisy jumped out. The only thing separating her from people like Joe and Doc Antle, who we'll be introduced to shortly, is the fact that Doc and Joe breed their animals and then sell them, which is illegal. The only difference is that you're not breeding. Why is there no plan in place to introduce these animals back into the wild? Is it because they've become too dependent on humans? And she says it. She's like, I have to keep these animals in captivity to keep them safe. Do you see how dumb that sounds? It's hypocrisy. It's hypocrisy. It's really all it is. And I believe what everybody else says. They say it quite a few times, where it's like she wants to be the only one. She wants to be the only owner of big cats. And like I said, everybody is an egomaniac in here. Everybody wants to be the one with the power, the special one. And I think that's a lot of the motivation for all of this. It's like everybody wants to feel special. Like, I have something that no one else has. And another thing that kind of turned me off to Carole was that she shows her closet and there's head to toe cat prints. Now, you might not be able to tell it from my last few videos, because I've been in a gray shirt and jeans all week. Thank you, isolation. But I love a bit of fashion. I love a good leopard print. I love a good cheetah print, you know, but I don't need to be covered head to toe in it. She says that she wears head to toe cat prints when she goes to talk to her elected officials, because she wants them to remember, oh, this is the person that's going to be breathing down my neck about the conservation of these big cats and the treatment of these big cats. Listen, no one needs you to be covered head to toe in cat print if your message is strong enough. If your message is strong enough, people will be like, yeah, I remember this woman, this is what she said, and this is what we're going to do. Nobody wants you to be remembered as, and I'm sorry I'm saying it, the crazy cat lady. Because that seems like what you're doing right now. You're like, I want to be remembered as the crazy cat lady. That's what you're giving me. That's what you're serving the children. And then we get another music video of Joe's. And he's taking Eric through his gift shop, and it's a great lead-in where you go from Carole's cat closet and you go to Joe's gift shop, where he's selling animal print underwear, and he's like, these are big sellers. And then they go to the front of the store and he shows where he sells his own albums. He sells music that he wrote and produced. He's like, there are 24 songs and 16 music videos. You're running this animal farm, or not even a farm, you're running the zoo, and yet you have time to write and record songs and film these music videos. The priorities are askew. So then we meet John Finley, Joe's husband. They were together from 2003 to 2014. Why? In all of this man's interviews, why is he not wearing a shirt? And where are his teeth? You're sitting in front of a man creating a documentary and you're like, I'm just not gonna wear a shirt today. Anyway. But they talk a little bit how they met and how long they've been together and how their relationship was, and you have like a flashback of a video that Joe was creating about how, you know, John's the strong and silent type, but he's a hunk, and I'm just like, okay. He looks like a lot of the guys I grew up with in Woodbridge, Virginia. Oh, and then we go into Joe talking about his struggle in his earlier life being gay. He says he attempted to end his life after coming out to his parents, and his father making him shake his hand in front of his mother, promising not to go to his funeral when he died. I'm like, listen, I could not imagine someone telling you at the age of 13, he said he came out, or he said he knew he was gay when he was 13, and then came out to his parents, and his dad was like, I don't even want you at my funeral. After I'm gone, I do not want you coming to honor me. And that's what caused him to attempt to drive his car off of a bridge, and that led him to meeting certain people, and he met his first exotic animal and held it in his hand while he was recovering from all of that. And that's where the obsession came from, basically. Then you meet Dr. Bhagavan Antle. This dude, my first thought looking at him, I was like, this dude looks like Philip Seymour Hoffman. Point blank, period. Not as charismatic, but that's exactly who he looks like. He's in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. His facility is a 50-acre preserve. The filmmaker is filming him coming to greet his guests. I guess it's a typical day at the park, and he's riding an elephant named Bubbles. Why do you have an elephant in South Carolina? Elephants belong in India and Africa. What are you doing? I really don't like anybody in this docuseries, but I really don't like Doc Antle, because again, this just shows the psychology of someone who feels that they have a right to own these animals, where he was like, people who are against people having relationships with animals, period, are trying to take me down. I'm paraphrasing, because I love big cats and they love me back. No one cares if these animals love you or not, sir. No one is jealous of you because these animals love you, except the other people who own big cats and exotic animals and feel that they love them. There's this reciprocal love going on there. People are trying to take you down because these animals belong in their natural habitats, period. Only someone that is dealing with some form of egomania would think this way. A couple of workers at Joe's facility admit that Joe actually sent them to Doc Antle's facility. Now, Joe's facility, I didn't mention it before, is in Oklahoma. Doc Antle is in South Carolina. So Joe sent his people from Oklahoma to South Carolina to see how Doc Antle runs his place, so that they could go back, tell Joe what they were doing, and then Joe would have them replicate what Doc Antle was doing. And then we find out how much it costs to feed these animals. I would have loved if they actually said like how much it costs to run the whole facility, how much it costs for upkeep, just taking care of the animals overall. But they state that it costs Joe $750,000 to keep the animals fed. I think that's a month. Yeah, because of how many animals he has. I think Joe says, I could feed a tiger for $3,000 a month. And he has over 100 tigers. Then you get into Joe talking about his brother who was killed by a drunk driver. And he started going to schools to talk to kids about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. And basically, it was a DARE program with exotic animals and then magic, because he's like, I can't keep these kids' attention. Children have very short attention spans, sir. They might retain like that much of the just say no message, but they're gonna be like, ooh, tiger! Like that's really all they're gonna be paying attention to. So it's kind of counterproductive. From the going to and from schools, Joe decided to start going to malls. And this is where Carole really started her campaign against Joe, because she would email the owners of the malls saying, this is wrong, he is exploiting these animals, please do not allow him to come back. And it worked, and that was a huge loss of revenue. But then we get more Doc Antle backstory. We learn that he was involved in Hollywood films, like animals from his facility were used in Hollywood films such as Ace Ventura, Jungle Book, Mighty Joe Young. Then you hear about Zanesville, Ohio, an incident that took place in 2011 where 50 wild animals from a private farm were intentionally set loose and ran amok in a community. They were deliberately let loose. The authorities eventually killed 48 of the 50 animals. That's travesty. It's a tragedy. Totally preventable because no one should be owning these animals. You have an interviewer talking to Joe, and he says, some people say this place is a ticking time bomb and it could be worse than Zanesville. And he says, yes, it would be worse than Zanesville. It would be a small Waco if someone were to come and try to take my animals from me. The guy was like, you'd shoot me? And he's like, I'd shoot you before I shoot my cat. I'm like, that message doesn't age well. Let me just tell you that. So then it shoots to, you see Joe in the forefront and then a tornado in the background. And Joe's just standing there. He's like, this is what you don't want when you own big cats. He's having somebody film him talking in front of this tornado. And I'm like, why are you filming in front of a tornado? If you're worried about your animals, why are you not at your farm trying to prepare for this potential storm? Is it about the animals or is it about you? That's literally what I'm wondering. Then we get into PETA. Of course they'd be targeting Joe because he's owning animals and they're trying to get on his facility. There are people who've trespassed on his property, which I do not condone. They're trying to see how these animals are being cared for, how they're being treated. And, they are a constant thorn in his side. And he has to beef up his security because of the number of people who have trespassed on his property, which is understandable as well. Then we get the introduction to the Big Cat Safety Act, which says that no one should own these big cats for the use of cub petting, cub breeding, and these animals should not be exploited, basically. Episode 2 opens very dramatically because it opens with the attack on Saf, and we're shown how she lost her arm. Joe says that she put her arm in a cage and a tiger tore her arm off. And you see her laying on the ground and it's pixelated so you don't see the carnage. And then again, you see Joe, he comes out and he tells everybody that the people that were in the gift shop saying there was an incident, I can give you your money back, or I can give you a rain check and you can come back on another day. But we are gonna cease operations for the day. And then once everybody's cleared out, you see Joe hang his head and go, I am never gonna financially recover from this. You're never gonna What about Saf, Joe? She just had her arm torn clean up. Like, what about her recovery? What about her physical recovery? What about her mental recovery? How is that not the first thing you think about? That shows where your head is at when shit goes down. And then Saf comes up and she's talking. She says she remembers signing a paper, so her hand was still functioning, but the doctors told her that it would require 2 years of reconstructive surgery for her to keep her arm, because she lost from the elbow down, basically. And they were like, we could either have 2 years of reconstructive surgery or we can amputate it. And she said, just amputate it. The thing in her head was, we need to give these animals a fighting chance. And she saw the way the media was running with the story of her mauling, basically. She was more concerned about the reputation of the park and how her accident was being portrayed than her own health. She stayed in the hospital for a total of 7 days. It was 5 days after her amputation. She went back to work. I understand wanting to, because that's your livelihood. You feel a loyalty to your employer and the animals you care for. But wouldn't it be better for you to allow yourself time to heal and not worry about what, like, because you already saw that the media was running with it. Like, there was really, what is you going back to work? Not barely, you had barely begun to heal from anything. What's going back to work gonna do? It's not gonna shut him up. It's really not. Because then all of these other narratives can come up, like, did he make her come to work? Why does she feel the need to come to work? Is this a, is this a sweatshop type of understanding? What's going on? Like, there's a million different things. You really should have focused on your own health, is what I'm saying. And then we find out what happened to John, because she's like, oh, I only have one arm, but I work with someone who has no legs. And then when you go into John, he says that his loss of limbs had nothing to do with the park. He had a zipline accident. They couldn't save from the knee down, so that's what happens. And he's just like, I've got cool legs. And I'm like, that's a great attitude to have. He was like, it was my fault. It had nothing to do with the park. I think that would have been great information to have in the first episode, because, you're sitting here, you see Saf with one arm, and you see this guy with prosthetic limbs, and you're like, are they going to tell us how the tigers took their legs and arm? Because that's what it's looking like. Like, you're working around wild animals. People are gonna make that connection. So, but I understand, because they're spreading it out to keep you watching. And then you get the realization that Joe bred and sold baby animals, which is illegal. It's very illegal. But that was how he made money in the beginning, after losing the traveling caravan, basically. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, John Finley says, I can't tell you where I went to sell these animals, but I can tell you I've been to 38 states. Like, oh my God. Then we are introduced to another unsavory character, Tim Stark. He becomes more prominent later in the series, but he and a lot of other people use this justification of, like, endangered species. And he's like, what do you do when an animal's endangered? You make more of them. So breeding is right. We're trying to save the animals by making more of them. Endangered species means there's not enough of them in the wild, so you should stop killing them so that they have the opportunity to replenish their population naturally. They don't need to be bred in captivity only to be sold and kept in captivity. You see where the problem is there, sir? And then we meet Mario. I'm so sorry if I butcher this last name. Trebo. Very chill, stately looking Latino man in Miami, Florida. Is a drug kingpin. He talks about his relationships with Joe and with Doc Antle. And everybody seems to know everybody in this community, which I get is a small community just by how it's presented, so it makes sense that everybody knows everybody. But Mario says that he's very close with Doc Antle, that he kind of taught him, and then he gives a backstory about what he did when he was in the business. And I find it so interesting that the filmmaker decided to intercut scenes from Scarface in while Mario was talking. And I get it, because somebody says that people used to drive by Mario's house and scream Tony Montana. But it's like, do we really need the Scarface iconography to drive the point home? I guess we did. Mario's wife shows her closet full of baby clothes for the baby primates that they have roaming around their home. She says that she goes to Babies R Us and buys the clothes made for preemies, and that they raise these animals in their home, and some of them, the primates, ended up sleeping in the bed with them. And I'm like, okay, that's a lot. It's not my preference, it's not what I would do, but go off. Then they start talking about all of the wives or girlfriends that Doc Antle has, and nobody knows the exact amount. They're like, he has 9, he has 3, he has 7, he has 6. Like, they ask, the guy with the long blonde hair, and they're like, how many girlfriends does Doc Antle have? And he's like, I don't fucking care. I was like, that's the best answer. That was the best answer. Why? Why do you feel the need to have all... Now, let me say this up front. I'm very sex positive. I have many friends who were or are in polyamorous relationships. So I'm not looking down on that. I'm noticing a trend though, because both Joe and Doc have multiple partners. Why? Is it, again, an ego thing where you're like, not only do all of these animals love me, but all of these people love me as well? Like, is it this feeling, this need of, I have power and influence over all of the multitudes? It must be. I don't even think that it is love when it comes to, especially Doc, because it doesn't sound like, he doesn't talk about his partners in a very loving manner. He doesn't really get into it because Eric Good tries to, he's like, you can't get into my complex lifestyle, it's not for prime time. Sir. And then we meet a former member of Doc's harem, as it were. She was at his facility from 1999 till she left in 2007. And she goes into how their days were controlled and how these women were made to change their names and how they were made to call Doc, and the name that we're presented with him is Bhagwan. And Barbara says that means Lord. Doc Antle says that it means you're a friend of God. His son, Cody Antle, says Bhagwan means master of the universe. And he's like, my father has created his own universe and he is the master of it. So it makes sense for him. Barbara tells of Doc Antle's pretty much his seduction of these women, how he would bring in women who were virgins or who were close to virgins, so that once they were with him, they felt bonded to him in this way. She tells of this practice, forgive me if I mispronounce it, I think Shaktiva, where a guru would touch you and thereby you would be enlightened as well. And she was like, it's basically that through sex. And I'm just like, ooh, it's very cultish. I'm not saying it's a cult, I'm saying it's cultish. We meet Travis Maldonado. When he first got there, he was 19 years old. He was originally from Southern California. Joe, John, and Travis all marry on January 18th, 2014. And you get into the kind of throuple relationship, and John says that he didn't care about sharing Joe with Travis because Joe had been trying for years to bring other people into their relationship. When Joe asked him if they could be in a relationship with him, he was like, okay, because he didn't know any better. And you get a big revelation later in the series, but it's like you can kind of see how uncomfortable Travis is at the wedding, where he like barely kisses Joe and he's jerking away from him and not very open with affection. John seems more there. So we dive deeper into the working conditions of everyone at these facilities, where we've already talked about Doc Antle's facility just a little bit with Barbara. Everybody works very long hours for very little or no pay. In the case of Carole Baskin, where she states that she hires volunteers. A lot of people say this when they're interviewed. They're like, this is my lifestyle, so I just roll with it, basically. When they talk about Carole's volunteers and how many there are of them, and they talk about like the levels, it's like you have the blue shirt, then you move up, or you have the red shirt, then you move up to the blue shirt, and you move up to the orange shirt. It could be a different color shirt, I don't remember right now. But, you know, Carole says, like, I don't even know their names until they've been here for like 5 years. And I'm like, oh, you look kind of familiar. I'm like, that's some shit. Like, you don't even take the time to get to know the people that work for you. Like, wouldn't that endear them more to you and make them want to do their job to the best of ability if they felt that they had some sort of connection with you other than just boss employee? They're not even being paid. Like, you can't even take the time to learn their names, and they're not even being paid a salary to do the work that they do for you. And then out of nowhere, we get a music video from Big Cat Rescue. Like, well, why does everybody have to make music videos? Are you trying to appeal to the youth? Because it's not working. with these tired music videos. It's really not. It's like, it just feels really self-serving, and you're like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Let's move on. But it really just enforces that all of these people are the same. Criticize themselves because they see themselves in everyone. Like, you all are doing the exact same things. You all are the exact same people. And that's why you hate each other. We see footage that Joe took when he toured Carole's facility, and we see footage from when he did a helicopter flyover of her grounds. We hear John saying that Joe was thinking about dropping grenades on Carole's facility. I'm like, what about the animals, Joe? Like, you wouldn't. You're not even considering the harm that dropping grenades arbitrarily on her facility would do to those animals. Your hatred for Carole is blinding you so much that you're just like, screw whatever animals we hurt. We're gonna destroy her facility. Like, so more about the working conditions, and we're going back to Barbara and talking about Antle's facility, where it's basically a cult. Like I said, it's a cultish, where it's like you have the women changing their names, their movements are being controlled, they're being made to work 18-hour days, and Barbara says that she was pushed to get implants, and the one reason that she didn't fight back was because she knew she would get to rest after the surgery so she could recover. And she was like, that just looked so good after working almost non-stop for all of this time. Just the fact that I would get to sleep was like, okay, let's go. Like, that's sad to be so tired and so sleep deprived. You're like, go ahead and let's get this breast augmentation so I can just take a nap. And then we find out where Joe finds most of the people that run his farm. And they are basically what's known as last resort employees. He finds people who are at the end of their rope, who really have nowhere else to go. They're otherwise unemployable. They may be homeless or just have become homeless. And he's like, here, you can come over here, you can get a hot meal, a roof over your head. All you have to do is take care of these tigers. He pays them $150 a week for 10 to 12 hours a day. You find these people who are down and out, and to them, that's a gold mine. They're like, I'm getting a little bit of money coming in, I've got a place to sleep and food to eat. That's all I need right now. Because you or me watching this would be like, you got me doing all of this dangerous work for $150 a week? Nope. It's only $600 a month? Absolutely not. Then we finally hear about the Walmart trucks, where they bring in the food that has expired or is just about to expire, and the employees pick through that, and that's how they are able to make their meals. Like, they get first dibs, and whatever they don't want is fed to the animals. And then we get into some shady stuff, where Barbara talks about her favorite tiger disappearing. I think what she said was, we don't know where they went and we didn't ask about that. And there's this little hush discussion about who may be euthanizing animals, when and why. Again, the seeds being planted, little foreshadowing going on, and then the tables turn and we start talking about Carole, who may or may not have killed her husband, and that leads into episode 3. Episode 3 is all about Carole. It's all about the husband that she may or may not have killed and fed to her tigers as to not leave evidence. Her second husband's name was Don Lewis. We are introduced to, and I didn't write down their names, I apologize. We're introduced to Don Lewis's first wife and his 2 adult daughters, and his business associate, who all believe that the reason that Don went missing was because he was getting ready to divorce Carole. Again, this whole episode reads like an episode of Snapped, except there's no resolution because we don't know what happened to Don. Carole was 20 and Don was 42 when they first met. Don was already married to his first wife and had kids. He was driving around, saw Carole walking down the street. She had tears rolling down her face, and he asked her if she wanted a ride. She said no. He showed her a gun and was like, hey, you can have this gun held on me the entire time. I just need somebody to talk to. So they drove around for hours, all night, while she held this gun on him. Nothing seems rational in this entire sphere of people. But we find out that Carole spent the night with him after driving around with him for hours, and Don ended up leaving his wife and children for Carole. And we're introduced to the sweet Anne McQueen, Don's executive assistant. Everybody who is introduced and speaks of Don says he lives very humbly. He doesn't want people to know that he had money or how much he had, to the point where everybody's given different amounts. Some people saying he's worth 20 million, he's worth 7 million, he's worth 10 million. Nobody knows, and that's the way he wanted it. Don was also an exotic animal lover. It feels like everybody just hooks up with people who also love animals that they shouldn't own. They began rescuing bobcats and lynx, and the name of their facility together, Don and Carole's, was Wildlife on Easy Street. In the beginning, she bred and sold these exotic animals to be pets. We hear from several people that Don loved Costa Rica because their regulations on animals and other things were so lax, so he went there frequently. We also learn that Don was a womanizer, a Lothario, if you will. I never want to ever be in a situation where I am so desperate to be loved and taken care of that I stay in a relationship where I am constantly disrespected in that fashion. Like, no. Because Carole stayed too, and like, it makes sense because Don had a lot of money and Carole had nothing when she met him. And she's like, I have to hold on to this because as long as I'm here, I'm taken care of and my daughter's taken care of. The scene shifts and we see Joe sitting like this, reading Carole's diary on his internet show. Like, how did you get a hold of this? Like, was this published somewhere? This is evidence. What are you doing? How did you get a hold of this? But we learned that Carole threatened to kill Don in court documents because he sought a restraining order against her. She threatened his life, and he talked about she had a gun, and she took his gun and hid it. Don's daughter says that the restraining order was sought in June, and by August, Don had vanished. And we get, I believe it was Don's handyman. I didn't record his name, I'm sorry. Where he said the last thing Don said to him was, if I pull this off, it'll be the slickest thing I ever did in my life. What did he mean? Did he mean faking his death? Or did he mean moving the Wildlife on Easy Street facility from Florida to Costa Rica? And we hear some of the details about the day of his disappearance, where it was like there was a van left at the airport with keys and a briefcase inside. The investigators actually went to Costa Rica to see if Don was planning to set up another animal sanctuary in that area, and they couldn't find anything. The handyman says that the police completely bungled the investigation, like they moved it from the airport and took it back to Easy Street and left it there for a couple of days before coming back to look at it. And it's like, yeah, if somebody was trying to cover up something, they would have had plenty of time to rid that van of fingerprints. According to Carole, Don flew illegally for most of the time he owned planes. And she was like, he lost his pilot's license basically the day he got it. So anytime he flew, he was flying illegally. And she was like, he was always flying under the radar, under where radar could detect you. So if anything happened, we would never know about it. That's oddly specific. She starts talking about how he had become forgetful. I think she said something like he could remember things from back in his childhood, but he couldn't remember what happened 5 minutes ago. And she said she talked to somebody and they were like, oh, that may be Alzheimer's. And she started speculating that maybe he had dementia. He might not know where he is. He might not know who he is. And of course, a lot of people are looking at that and going, They're like, not the Don I know. He knew exactly what was going on. He had all of his wits about him. This is a fallacy. They're like, she's wrong. She did something to him. We all know it. We know she has something to do with it. Then you get this Dear Kitty Kitty video where Joe is singing this song where he's speculating that she murdered her husband and fed him to her tigers. And he has a Carole lookalike in the video feeding meat to these tigers. How much do you hate a person to put this out. And then you have Don's daughter saying how much Carole's family hated Don. Like, I think at one point they said that there was a sign up in their house saying never speak that man's name again. Oh, that happened after he was declared legally dead. Carole and her father asked Kenny, that's the name of the handyman, to retrieve the will. Actually, they asked him to retrieve some papers from Don's office, and he did it because that's just what he did. And Anne says that she was the executor of both the will and the power of attorney, but Carole had those changed to her, as she was the wife. She had Don declared legally dead 5 years and 1 day after he was reported missing, and the police said that they will keep the case open until they have proof of Don's passing. And then you see Carole making this video titled "The Science of Becoming Rich." Oh, the science of getting rich. How would you know how to get rich? You were born poor, you were poor until you met Don, until you married him. You didn't have, his money became yours after you declared him legally dead and changed all these documents to make sure that you were the beneficiary of his estate. What? What science do you know? What wisdom do you have to impart upon the masses, madam? I do believe she had a hand in his disappearance. I believe that she knows more than she's letting on. That's for us to speculate. It really is. That's why they put it out there. It is for us to speculate. We will never know. The only people that know are Don and Carole.